everyone. Welcome to our Psychic Sisters discussion today. We have a special guest, which is Cassie Carey.
Hello.
She's coming from the UK.
Yep, in Brighton.
Hi, Cassie.
In
the UK. In the UK, we miss you.
Yeah,
and of course, my psychic sister, Kris.
Hi, everybody.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit because, Cassie's in the UK doing film school. So we thought we'd talk a little bit about spirit and kind of how it works through artists. The reason that I thought of doing this topic is because on a commercial, there's this speech that runs through this commercial right now. And it's a speech that Charlie Chaplin gives. And it's talking all about how we should come together and be a human race, and we should be, live in unity and all this stuff. And I thought, and that's a Charlie Chaplin, and of course he has a really nice voice and a very, English accent. And I thought that's really weird. I've never heard this before, and it's from The Great Dictator, the movie, The Great Dictator. So I thought, I've never seen it, so we watched it. And it was so strange because it was made in 1940. And yet when you watch it, you would swear it was a retrospective looking back. And it's eerie. It's really eerie because it's almost like a warning of what was to come. And I wondered as I watched it, was this inspired to warn the world? And he gives this speech at the end of the movie as kind of this idealized changed version of Adolf Hitler, where he gives this speech about how we should just all kind of lay down our arms and have a peaceful world. And all, it's really interesting to see it because it's the Adolf Hitler giving this speech, but it's about, humanity coming together. And it was so strange. I just wondered if it was inspired by spirit and inspired to give the world a warning, but also to tell them what to do, to tell them what needs to happen. The other ones, again, I kind of got interested in this, and I looked up a couple of other ones that I thought may have kind of influenced the world at their time. And one that came up was Bambi, the movie Bambi. Mm-hmm. And what it said was that during this time that the movie came out, recreational hunting was cut in half. It went down 50% when that movie came out, and how much it influenced hunters. And because you think of it as, isn't that weird? Because you think of it as influencing, you think of it as influencing like children, because we're all affected by it when we see it, but yeah, so I thought that was really interesting. And there's all kinds of art, that can be influenced by spirit. And when I've given my readings, again and again and again, whether someone is a songwriter, a visual artist, like a painter or a sculpturist or anything like that, it always comes across that when you come to this life as an artist, creating things that will be left on earth, whether it's movies or television or whatever it is, that it's a sacred responsibility. That's come across again and again and again in my readings. And so I kind of will leave it up, start the discussion that way and ask you guys what you think and what you come across, not only because I know, Cassie, you're a screenwriter and you're also a director. And then Kris, you're also
want to be.
Well, and Kris, you're also you've done writing and screenwriting and poetry. And I just wonder how you guys have been influenced in your own work, and if there's other work that you've witnessed in your life, like these ones that I was just talking about, that you think have influenced you and maybe been like the right time for the world to have these things. What do you think, Cassie?
You talking about that made me think that one story I always see reoccurring, kind of like around like the same period of time, like something really bad will happen in history, and there's always another version of the Wizard of Oz that keeps coming back, because right after Vietnam we had the Wiz, and then right after the Great Depression we had the Wizard of Oz with like MGM, And then with Wicked was kind of, you know, during the Bush years, which I think is really interesting. And that has influenced me a lot, you know, like with writing and with, you know, everything.
And Cassie, what were the, just so people, because I think I know the versions. I mean, I know Wicked and I know the first version of The Wizard of Oz, but what was the different in the different versions that you think were influenced by what was happening?
Yeah, from what I can tell from The Wiz, a big thing that's different is that they talk about um, society a lot, and you know, because it's an African American cast, so and they talk about
Right.
society and being kind of held back by by I guess the world they live in a way. And there's a lot of like
Right.
things about the economy that like subtle hints about the economy and subtle hints about, you know, just about living in poverty, you know, that just weren't in the
Oh,
original.
right.
Like there was a lot more like references to real
Right.
world than there were in the, because you're right, yeah, it was all escapism in the 1931 film. There was like nothing that was
Right.
towards um our world, but it felt like that was more
Right.
kind of another dimension almost of our world. And then with
Right.
Wicked, it was more about the government, and
Hmm.
it was way more political than, you know, than
Right.
it was way more political than probably the other Wizard of Oz versions.
Right. And the one in the most recent one in Wicked, it talked about like animal rights,
Yeah,
losing your voice, like your freedom of speech, that kind of
a lot
thing.
about like protesting. Yeah,
Right. Hmm. Yeah.
yeah.
Interesting. That's a good one, Cass. Yeah. Um, Kris, what do you think?
Well, there's so many. I mean, I think that so many of like the great works of literature um,
Hmm.
probably reflect that and reflect their times. I mean, if you think of somebody like Dickens writing,
Hmm.
writing David Copperfield or something like that, that's bringing a lot of attention to or A Tale of Two Cities. You know, I mean, there's these
Right.
talking about institutions, political power, the situation, you know, that's going on. And, you know, all of those kinds of things are very, I think they're very personal to the artist, but then they go beyond that. They, you know, they do draw, I think, from, you know, a sort of a higher place that,
Hmm.
that, um, that sort of brings that element that speaks to everybody, right? And that's been throughout history. I mean, you can talk about Dickens, but you can go back, you know, thousands of years even to like Aristotle or Shakespeare, you
Uh-huh.
know, addressing
Right.
the,
Right.
the days. But it's interesting to me how so often artists, and Dickens was like this. I don't know about Shakespeare, but I would guess they talk about that. They talk about sometimes not really even knowing where it came from, or, you know, this was only partially me, and they acknowledge that inspiration. And if you've ever gotten into the mode where you're working on some sort of artistic endeavor, it feels very much like that. Like you kind of slip into something where it's you, but it's also beyond you. And those are the kinds of things that I think are
Right.
timeless and that do speak to many generations, just like you know, the Wizard of Oz. That really, when you come down to it, is about personal power. And there's so many times when that message is so important, and it comes
Right.
back again and again and again. And how many iterations have there been of Shakespeare's work, or of, you know, Dickens' work, or of anybody who's a classic, and
Right.
those kinds of things. So yeah.
Well, and it brings to mind when you talked about that, I thought about like George Orwell, like 1984, how it's kind of this, it's a story for the time it was written, but it's definitely a warning about what can happen in a society. So, um, and I felt that way when I was watching The Great Dictator. I felt like this was both a warning and also a plan. This is what you do about it, you know?
Yeah.
And it just seems so inspired to me. And same with, yeah, those are great examples. And Cassie and Kris both, how, when you have your own, can you give examples of times you've written things yourself where you felt like it was something else kind of pushing you? And what did it feel like when that happened? Maybe Cassie, you can go.
I think the TV show I've been working on was like that. Because that's kind of what got me into screenwriting in the first place. I just had an idea that kept nudging me, and I just couldn't, shake it. And I just kind of had to do it and had to write it down. It got to the point I was constantly thinking about it. I remember before I started writing it, I had a bunch of dreams in a row, just hounding me basically. And yeah, and I've had it with other projects as well. Not as much as that one. I think that was probably the most I ever had that. But all of my projects, even the documentary I'm doing right now, it stuck with me. I should really do this, or I should really mention this, even when I was like, oh, this isn't going to work, or these the two girls I interviewed, they're not going to say yes, they're not going to do it. But it's I just kind of went with my gut in a way.
Right. It's interesting that you say that it nagged you, because that's one thing I've talked about. I was just talking about it in this interview that I did for a podcast, that I think a lot of people think that whenever they get a message from spirit or something beyond you, or beyond the, outside of this realm, that it feels good. And it doesn't. It's a lot of times it is a nagging. It's a persistence. It pushes you. And I think that is so important to understand, because a lot of times people will say, I don't know why, but I just feel like I'm not enjoying my job anymore. I just want to leave. I don't really like it. And it's like, that is your guides telling you it's time to move on. And that's such it's so common, especially when you don't know why. But it's just it just started. I don't know why. And it's because they're trying to push you into the next phase, or to remind you what you're here to do. It's enough messing around over here. You need to get started with this. And I think that's important to note for people that are interested in kind of drawing on spirit, is that it doesn't always feel good. It can feel like a persistent nagging. And have you had that, Kris, where you've had that kind of persistence of an idea or something?
I think that's the biggest part for me of writing, is that feeling of I have to get this out. It has to come out. And to be honest, all of my anything that's really been meaningful to me has been quite a painful process. I mean, it's just, I'm sure you know that, Cassie. I mean, you want to write it and you want to get it out, but it's painful because it has to be right, because you know how it's supposed to be. And so there's a lot of molding to get it that way. And I have one project that I worked on that's also was a TV show, and that one was just insanely inspired. Some of the things that happened to sort of get information to me about it. It's historical, so there was just stuff that sort of had to churn up and turn up, and it just did in the weirdest ways. And then other things that have been purely projects from sort of fiction projects, books or whatever. It just feels like the story has to come out, and you can't let it go. It's it's like you said, it's in your dreams, it's in your head all the time. You're just thinking of it until you can get it out. I always say onto paper, but into the computer, however it is now. And poetry is very much that way, because it's so, it's not detailed. And so you're trying to paint a picture with very few words usually, and with a lot of emotion in the words. So it's, that's different too. But you can feel when it's, when you're sort of in that groove, because it does feel beyond you. And so there have been times when I went back and and looked at stuff and thought, well, I don't even know where this came from. That's pretty good. I don't even know where it came from.
It's interesting too. And I made me think, when we have these, when you have those kinds of things where it's like, I have to get it out, I have to get it out. I think that a lot of people think, if I have that experience, it's like it nags me. I have this idea, I have to get out. I finally get it out. It's finally out. I think some people think so it should be successful. You know what I mean? So it should be, we should, okay, now it's gonna be this big success. And I just wonder if it's not the kind of quote unquote success we think it should be. What do you think the reason is why it's being pushed out of you? Why you're being asked to do it? Is it for a future time? Is it just because we're here to create? What do you think it is? If it's not like, because I think we think, oh, well, this is going to bring me fame, or this is going to bring me, money, or it's going to bring me a contract or whatever. I think that a lot of artists will assume that because it is something so intense, it's such an intense experience. But if it's not for that, why do you think it's such a push to get people to create? Either of you?
Well, I think that because I've had this come up in a couple of readings too, and I really think that we have a very limited definition of what success is. Because if we're
right,
that success is fame and or money, that's very capitalistic Western society, and not that there's anything
like
wrong with
material.
that. Yeah, very material, and
right.
that's fine. I mean, of course, people want to make a living and everything, but there's so much more to creativity in the ways that benefit us and ways that just put it out into the universe. And the universe, I mean, I say this again and again in like readings, and it comes up in Jacob's journal stuff all the time. The whole purpose of being, of everything being, is growth and expansion. So it's learning, it's putting things,
Right.
bringing new things into the universe. That's what growth is, and that's very much
Right.
about creative process. So it's about our personal growth, which is what we're here to do. It's about this expansion of the universe, and then beyond that, we don't always know where it goes. If I write something, I usually show it to very few people, but who knows? Maybe it influences those people, or maybe it touches them in some way, or maybe it leads to something
Right.
else. I mean, I'm sure, like Cassie, since you started, you've probably seen yourself grow so much and learn so much, and you add on, and who knows where that's leading. It could lead to something, because I think art, what you really want to do is express something that's in you and then touch people in some way, to some extent. And so it's wonderful if that can help you and anybody else in your circle. But who knows, it may be something that touches hundreds or thousands or millions of people, and then it's it feels to me, then it's like growing exponentially when you are able to share it in that way. But it's very personal too. So in some ways, I think most people who get into that groove are kind of like, once you get it out, you want to share it with people. But on the other hand, that's an accomplishment in itself, like that it's done. And it feels really good when something is done.
What do you think, Cassie? What has been your experience?
I think that it can. I think it can also be towards, I mean, for me at least, it's been towards my education. Like all the projects I've done, whether they're, not seen yet, or I want them to be seen or never seen, or I have done or almost done, like they have helped me towards like my education, like making me more confident in my own abilities going forward, that when I do actually need to, use those abilities, I can, and I have like a script idea, or I have, this idea that I can just pull out of a hat and just, just use it. It's almost like preparation in a way. I think
Right.
it can also be preparation for you that, yeah, maybe your first, like if you're a writer, maybe your first book won't, be anything, but then maybe your second book might, or your third book might, it kind of, it escalates almost, which happens a lot for people. It's not, overnight success isn't really a thing, really, especially now with the internet. I mean, success varies so much. You can still have like an audience, like,
Right.
You with Intuitiview and like Carboy and Kris, you can still have an audience, but not be, have millions of people watching you.
Oh, I was going to say, talking about this, the sort of internet age that we're in, when you're able to push out so much artistic work, it really does, I think it really does add to the ability for people to sort of cope with different situations in their life. And, certainly in like these big, global situations and countrywide situations, but sometimes things very personal, like, kids that are going through certain things, or, people that are just experiencing something. And that's, to me, that feels very inspired. And this day and age, when the whole world is changing so much, to have this sort of internet age when there's so much out there. Like if I lost a pet, I can go I can go on the internet and I can find groups who talk about that, or people who have written about that, or all of these kinds of things that really are artistic works, reaching out, creative works, inspired things that help other people. And that's, I mean, I think that's the big push from Spirit too, is that idea of just helping people.
Right. And I guess that's part of it too, is that you really don't know why it's happening. You kind of, there's a trust factor there that you just kind of, as an artist, maybe you're supposed to just kind of trust it and just let it flow, rather than try to control what's going to happen with it or where it's going to go. Right.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's key. You can't write for, in fact, to me, and I know people, a lot of people, Cassie, you would know this especially, there's a lot of people who will push you to write for the market.
Yeah.
You can do that, but it's different. It's very different. And I think when you write from sort of your heart and your soul, it has a much different feeling, and it's much more sort of backed by that kind of spiritual influence that we're talking about.
Yeah, and you feel more proud of it too, as well.
Yeah,
Like,
'cause it's personal.
when it comes from your heart, or like something you've thought about, your own personal like idea or feeling, or experiences. It's a lot more personal, and you feel proud when it's actually out there. Whether it is successful or not successful, you're just proud it's out there.
And it may be different, a little bit different for different mediums. I mean, there's so much patronage in certain kinds of the arts, and so people do write because, I mean, or paint or whatever, to for some reason, or some person, or some sort of um, I can't think of the word right now, commission, some kind of commission, but and still create these very important works of art. But then so many of so many things are just so they have sort of a special like glow around them or something, when they are these things that comes from deep inside the artist.
So do you guys have any last thoughts about this subject? How people can kind of, maybe suggestions for how people can kind of tap into that? Because some people, it is a nagging, like they don't have to worry about it, it's just there. But people that want to tap into it, maybe they're working on something and they need help, or they're working on something and they want to be kind of get in that flow with kind of whatever you want to say, spirit energy or the universe or something else outside of them that's helping them. Do either of you guys have any suggestions on how to tap into that?
I think for me, I mean, I think, stepping away and like almost meditating is a good way. Listening to music is a good way. I mean,
Mhm.
that helps me to like
Mhm.
meditate and think,
Mhm.
and I'll come up with a lot of ideas just listening to music. It helps a lot, but also too, I think asking your spirit guides to help. Like if you're having trouble with something, or if you're not sure, you could just kind of leave it and then ask your spirit guides and see if anything. And
Right.
sometimes it'll come in dreams. I guess whatever you're receptive to, it'll come that way, or just be something that will pop in your mind. Oh, I should do this.
I think
Right.
that the meditation is really a good idea, and literally asking your spirit guides. A lot of people sort of hem and haw and just sort of expect it to come in. But I also think that sort of the work, just sitting down to actually do it. And I remember years ago, the very first reading I ever had from Linda G, if you follow her. Um, it was sort of at the end of the reading, it was like some, um, spirit came in. She was doing sort of medium work. And she said, they said to tell you, the universe doesn't like whiners. And I'm like, oh man, because I did sort of lament about stuff. And there is something to be said for just sitting down and trying to do the work, even if it doesn't come out perfectly, but taking the time to sort of be consistent and do as much as you can. Should we say something about how people can use art like right now to sort of, because times are tough, because everything's so crazy, and maybe we could say some couple of favorite things that we've watched lately, or something that help us, or listen to music or whatever, or podcasts or whatever, that sort of feel inspired, that might inspire them.
Say for me, I when I when I get in moods like I'm frustrated with what's happening, or I get upset or sad, and I think Cassie's like this too. I usually go to nostalgia. I usually go to I watch like I Love Lucy. I watch a comedy too. I tend to kind of gear towards uplifting, comedies, musicals. I tend to like Singing in the Rain is a favorite of mine. Anything that brings kind of that light-hearted kind of joy, I think it just kind of alleviates some of the heaviness of what's happening right now. And Cassie has a different take on it, because she'll watch things that are kind of on the darker edge, because that
Yeah,
it'll make her feel better,
I'm
because
weird
it's
that
not that
way.
bad.
Yeah, I
So,
take the weirder route.
what do you think, Cassie?
Yeah. I usually, if I'm feeling sad or mad, at anything, I like to watch people who have lives worse than mine. Because my go-to is always like the Judy Garland movie. I always watch that, and it's just because it makes me feel so much better about my life afterwards. But I do agree with that.
Right.
I think I was gonna add on to what you said, that you know um, that watching a lot of old movies, I think, are probably a good thing, because they went through things much worse than what we're going through right now. And I don't know, I think just the combination of knowing what they went through and then seeing them have like film these musicals and comedies, it's, I guess, uplifting in a way. It feels like, oh, maybe the world isn't so bad or dark.
Yeah,
Or you could do
definitely.
what I do and just watch dark movies.
Well, there's a lot of people that like that, though. It helps them to watch. And there's a lot of people who do watch like superhero movies and things like
Yeah.
that, to make you that feeling of being able to overcome. I like old movies too, and lately I've done a couple of like old Disney movies, like from my childhood, that were just so
Yeah.
comforting. When I was a kid, I watched The Three Lives of Thomasina. If you've never seen it, it's a pip. It's so good. I love a lot of the things that I loved as a kid. That even if the times, like we sort of lived in turbulent times growing up, not in my home, but like turbulent times. And yet I was very, as a kid, so I was innocent and protected. So I love like Bewitched reruns, or I love Lucy. I mean, we watched those in reruns, 50 years ago, but I do like that. And then uh, my mom, who is almost 88, loves TCM. And so she watches Turner Classic Movies all the time. And it's really can be very comforting, whether it's stuff that's like musicals or comedies, or even things that were a little bit propagandish, but also just really uplifting from World War II. That, that was such a struggle, and yet all these great movies about people overcoming, or like The Best Years of Our Lives, or something that's just kind of fun and campy, even though it takes place in that time period. They're very comforting. And I know there's a lot of stuff coming out now. I know there's a lot of things out there now, contemporary things, that are a lot of fun too, or just interesting, or really different, some like Stranger Things or something like that, that's really different, but it's just intriguing, and it sort of takes you to another world. It sort of puts you into another world, and you experience that for a while, and it allows you to, come back to this world a little bit like refreshed, or feeling better, or, having had that break that you need. So I think there's a lot of stuff, even right now, even stuff that doesn't have to be like classically serious and things like that, but still inspired for the times.
Right. And I know Cassie, I mean, one book series that she loved during a really difficult time, if you don't mind me saying, Cassie,
No, it's fine.
Was the Hunger Games. Remember, you got really into that.
It's the same type of thing. It's, I think, and for that, it was a similar thing that you said, that, that basically you're seeing people being able to get through difficult times. And I think that uplifts you, or at least makes you stronger. Or just proud that like you're making it through this, this difficult time, even if it's hard, even if it's tough, and even if you haven't gotten through it yet, that you're at least proud of yourself that you're going through it, and that you have somewhat of a level head, I guess. But that was a big one for me. I mean, there were a few book series that I liked that were at different points. Like, I know I loved, like, I got really into Roald Dahl when I was younger, when I wasn't really liking school. And that was kind of, it was kind of a similar thing. That one was more escapism, though. I think it was more just like, just something happy to read, and so it kind of goes both ways, I think.
Yeah.
And it's up to the individual. Whatever helps you is okay. And that's why there's such a diversity of things out there.
Right.
Because, different people react to things in different ways. And, we just have a multitude of choices these days, whether it's, in television and movies, but also like in literature and poetry and art. There's a Twitter page that I follow, and it's just women's art. And every day they just post, 10 different things that are just examples of women's art. And it's like, 85% of the people I've never heard of. Some of them are very local, and it's different kinds of, it's paper art, or it's yarn art, or it's, some sort of installation art and things like that. And it's fascinating. And so many times I've clicked on it and sort of, gone down that very good rabbit hole of, art and discovering more things. I mean, there's so much out there now, so much that's accessible to us, even while we sit in our homes and try and wait this out.
Right. Well, and maybe we also kind of answered one of our own questions, which is, why do you do this if it's not like this, a raving success, or it doesn't come a bestseller or something? It could not be for this time. And it also you don't know that it could be even just helping a few people, get in touch with what they need to do, or have a better experience in their life at that moment. maybe that isn't for us to really judge what happens after that point that we've created it. It's just that we've done it in a way that is authentic and comes from a very an organic place.
Right, with good intention behind it.
Right, exactly. Good intention, exactly.
Yeah, and you don't know who it's going to touch and how it's going to affect their life, and then who they're going to.
Right.
Touch. So.
Yeah, I have a question for you guys, if that's all right.
Uh-huh.
Of course.
Just what were some like movies or TV shows or books that kind of got you through hard times, that you remember getting you through some rough periods?
Well, I used to sit in my room for hours as like a teenager and play Paul Simon music.
And as the room next door, I can testify to this fact because I heard it playing
1,000 times, the same songs over. But it was one of those, he's such a great lyricist.
Yeah.
And, there were so many things that I was just like, oh my gosh, he gets it. He gets it.
Right. Right.
And there's a lot of songwriters like that, like singer-songwriters that just, to me, it's like so, and that stuff that just feels so inspired.
Yes.
And with the combination of music, it's just like, I just, at the Democratic National Convention, when they had Stephen Stills playing for what it's worth, I was just like,
oh, right.
This is so, every time I hear Ohio, it just like,
right.
And that is not, necessarily uplifting music, but it just
right.
touches a chord that's like, yes, you get it. Somebody else gets it, So, oh my gosh, Paul Simon is, as like your mom said, poor you. Yeah, I
was the same way with music, especially as a teenager. I think you always find those artists that you love, that you identify with. Mine were a lot of vocalists because I was a singer, so I listened to a lot of Barbra Streisand, a lot of Linda Ronstadt. But that was just more like I was kind of honing my own skill, listening to them and learning, and that made me feel like at least I'm growing, I'm doing something, and I'm also like dreaming of a future as well. I was kind of manifesting in a way what I was going to be doing in the future, when I was going to be singing in the future. But I think as far as like movies and TV, even as a kid, I watched stuff that was older than the time. I don't know why I do that. I just do. But even as a kid, I was watching, where stuff was, there were more modern things that were happening. Like All in the Family was modern at the time, but I was watching like the Monkees and the Brady Bunch, which was like in the
I
60s.
Love Lucy.
I Love Lucy, exactly. And even now I do that. Now I go back and watch All in the Family and the Mary Tyler Moore Show. So
I think probably the only one that was probably from your time you watched was probably Little House on the Prairie.
Yes, I watched Little House on the Prairie, and that to me too it's not only the show is of a simpler time, but I remember that time in my life was a simpler time. It was when I was a kid, so my parents were there. All of my relatives that I miss so much now were still alive. It was in so many ways, it was just a less complicated time. As you get older. And in so many ways, things get better, but things do become more complicated because you do go through deaths and weddings and all. You build more family and lose family. It's emotionally more complicated as you get older. So sometimes retreating back is it's just nice. It's a break, is what I think of it as.
It is, and that's why nostalgia is so appealing. I think because it always harkens back to that simpler time for us, So my nostalgia is a little bit older than your nostalgia, because we're so far apart. Far. But I'm 9 years older than you, so that's a big time in TV time.
Mm-hmm.
So I do that too. I go back to a time, and there was when your parents are there, when friends were there that have since passed on, or relatives that have since passed on. Even just like, having grown up in San Jose, the San Jose is gone. The way that it was when we were kids is pretty much gone. And so just to be able to watch these things that bring back those memories of how it used to be, and it feels very immediate, and it's very comforting,
Yeah.
in whatever way you can do that. Now, other people may be, comforted by thinking of the future, or
Mhm.
or whatever, but or if their childhoods were chaotic, or not that perfect, to going back to things that that maybe show what a perfect childhood, like the Brady Bunch or something like
Right.
that. But there may be other things or other ways of finding comfort, but there's always art out there in some form that can do it, I think.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I've been looking up pictures of Blockbuster because I like what it used to be like, because that was, part of like
It was a big
2000s,
deal.
and I've been revisiting like a lot of like just games I played at that time, or in TV shows I watched at that time, and movies and stuff. I've been revisiting a lot of stuff from like the early 2000s, because
Mhm.
that was my like nostalgia, and maybe like the late 90s, since it kind of like bled through, to the 2000s.
And a lot of the stuff, Cassie, that you're looking at too, is not only from your childhood, but it's also kind of uniquely American.
Yeah.
You're looking at like you were watching like SpongeBob and like Drake and Josh and stuff, like very Americana, kind of like that generation television, and then like Blockbuster is very, I think of that as very like American.
Yeah,
I'm sure
because
they did have Blockbuster.
here in England it's non-existent. It's
Right.
and that was a big thing for me, like to remind me of home.
Yeah.
Whenever I got homesick, I would like look up nostalgia things, or just things that I remember used to be around more. Yeah.
Right.
It's really things that make us feel safe, I think.
Yeah.
Especially in these times when it just feels very unstable and unsafe
Yeah.
in some ways. And so anything that can make us feel safe, even if it's for 15 minutes or 30
Yeah.
minutes or however long.
Yeah. And kind of lift your spirit in some way, even if it is like remembering something, or even, because even when you remember a different time, sometimes it can pull you closer to those those relatives, or those people who have passed. Things will come back to you that you've completely forgotten, and it will make you feel so close to them still.
Yes.
So it is an uplifting experience, I think, in so many ways, to visit nostalgia,
and really can be a very spiritual experience, like
yeah.
it really does bring us anything that sort of lifts you up that way and lifts your vibration.
Mm-hmm.
It does reach into the spiritual, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, and again, that's answering that question of that's why it's there. You talked a lot about when Carl Reiner passed away, and all of the work that he left behind, and all of it was so uplifting, and so had such laughter and joy behind it, that it was a real loss when he was gone. And we lost a lot of, over the last few years, we've lost a lot of great artists, and yeah.
And thank goodness that we have the things they left behind.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. Well, good, guys. Well, thanks for having this discussion. Hopefully it was interesting, and will provoke some thought. And please leave comments below. We love to read the comments. And Cassie, do you want to tell them about your blog?
Yeah, basically I just talk about film and different, films I love, and I guess it's more philosophical than it's not really reviewing films or reviewing TV shows. It's more like talking about the meaning behind them, or the philosophy of them, or like my take from them. Like my take is so important, but whatever. I have fun writing it.
What's your most recent one, Cassie?
So it is about the history of Scream Queens.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, basically from, I guess, I'm trying to think when, it kind of began on the stage. So I guess 1910s to, I guess now, just kind of recapping it on how they kind of existed, and where
And
they kind of,
evolved. It's very
yeah,
thought-provoking.
exactly, how they
Yeah.
evolved from kind of damsels in distress to more nuanced depictions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how can they find it, Cass? And we'll put a link below, but they can go to, is it Medium?
Yeah, you can just go on the blog site Medium and just put my name, Cassie Carey, and then you'll find it.
Great. And Kris is at Cardvoyant Kris. And are you going to be doing a Jacob's Journal, Kris?
I think so. I have a couple of short ones that I think I'm going to do, and then I may do sort of an evolution into presenting the material some different way, because there's a lot of it. So
Right.
I'm trying to figure that out. If you have
Okay.
suggestions, I'm open.
All right. Okay. All right. And I'm in Intuitiview, and we'll talk to you guys later. Bye.
Bye.